Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. A proposal to expand the use of surveillance cameras in Seattle has been put on hold. Also, the city's taking a close look at gaps in its 911 system. Plus, a plan to rapidly install more homeless shelter spaces is facing new scrutiny from the City Council. Councilmembers Bob Kettle and Maritza Rivera are responding to these issues and the questions you're sending in too. Next on City Inside Out, Council Edition.
We want to protect our residents in Seattle, including our immigrant population.
One of the things that we need to get away from is this bipolar world of SPOG and care. And that's what we're going to do.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. Welcome once again to City Inside Out, Council Edition. I'm Brian Callanan. Great to be with you here on the Seattle channel. Also, great to be with a couple of council members here for our monthly show, including Councilmember Maritza Rivera, who represents District 4 in Northeast Seattle, also chairs the Libraries, Education, and Neighborhoods Committee. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to be here.
And also we have with us Councilmember Bob Kettle, represents District 7 from downtown to Magnolia, Inner Bay out to South Lake Union, also chairs the Public Safety Committee. Thank you for being here. And I should mention you were the Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade not too long ago here in Seattle.
Yes, a great honor and an honor to be here, too.
All right, top of the afternoon to you. Here we go. I want to start with some current events, if I could. Mayor Wilson recently announced a plan regarding surveillance cameras that I know you both are aware of. She's actually pausing a planned expansion of closed-circuit or CCTV cameras with an exception for areas around the city's stadiums before the World Cup. But she won't turn off any of the cameras the city currently uses, except for one near a clinic with reproductive health services. She's pausing the use of automated license plate readers, too, until the city can get aligned with a newly approved state law about that. The mayor says she has heard from a lot of passionate, emotional people who support and who do not support expanding the use of cameras in a press conference.
But precisely because different people and different communities experience the cameras differently, it's important to base a decision on more than feelings. It's important to ground our actions in a thorough understanding of how the cameras are being used, of the public benefits they are providing, and of any harm they are causing or could cause.
So both of you put out statements regarding this, and Councilmember Kettle, maybe I can get your reaction here first. The mayor is talking about further study of the impacts of expanding surveillance, with concerns about how that could impact local immigration populations during the federal immigration crackdown, or women seeking reproductive care too. Some thoughts about this?
We've already had those thoughts. We've been working these issues from day one, starting in 2024 with ALPR, CCTV, the closed-circuit TV, the first time, and by the way, ALPR, automatic license plate readers.
Thank you.
And then we came around again with CCTV as well. And then on top of that is the real-time crime center. So all these points that are raised, we've been working in. And to the point of the mayor's comments yesterday, I welcome an audit. I welcome a review. Key here is that it has to be done by the World Cup, ahead of the World Cup. That is so important. Secondly, you noted the ALPR, again, the automatic license plate readers. We just had a bill passed in Olympia.
Yes.
And it's important. And so we do need to do our checks on that, see where we need to adjust and fix. And I will say on that, if you look at all the protections and the things that we built in, the protocols that we built in with our ALPR, and you add things from Olympia like the 21-day rule, and importantly, the public disclosure request exception, the PDR exception, we basically address the issues that people raise. And so we should be moving forward with ALPR, however way that we need to do. There's a couple pieces that need to be adjusted, of course. But we've really addressed all the issues related to ALPR, so we should be moving forward once that adjustment is made.
Okay, stay tuned. I know there's some more information coming from your committee on this. But Councilmember Rivera, I want to get your opinion on this. And if I could, I'm going to add in a question from a viewer to set things up here. Mark writes this. We put cameras on an apartment property that we own that had constant crime, car break-ins, etc. The criminal activity stopped once they saw the camera system. How can the city use and encourage the use of cameras and ensure that the surveillance isn't used to track illegal aliens so they are politically acceptable? We have to stop the crime. Councilmember Rivera, some thoughts here, and if you could weave in some thoughts about what Mark is asking about here too.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Brian. You know, my colleague, Councilmember Kettle, and I are aligned on this, and this is something that Council worked a lot on when we passed the real-time crime center cameras and the ALPR. And I'll
you're
say
both on the Public Safety Committee, right?
I am now. I wasn't before, but
Right,
this
right.
is something that my constituents care deeply about, as do I. And I also care about privacy protections, which is why former Councilmember Moore and I put privacy protections in place for ALPR. For instance, ensuring that there's only you know, if officer, well, this was real-time crime center actually also, is officers need to ask permission. There's only one person who can view the footage, and any officer wanting to look at the footage has to have written permission and just that kind of stuff. And then also, Councilmember Moore put privacy protections in it where the provider, not the provider,
the camera operator.
The camera, Axon.
Yes,
the,
right.
Company,
the vendor here we're talking about. You got it.
Would, if they had a reach out or a warrant to see the footage, that we would get notified and so forth. And that way we were trying to avoid and really try to protect folks that would come here for reproductive or gender affirming care. That is important to us.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that folks did not have, including the feds, access to that information. And that's why we put those privacy protections in place. So I would say to Mark, the person who asked the question, it is an important tool. It's not the only tool, but it is an important tool on the investigative side.
Yeah.
When crime happens and we use cameras in order to be able to investigate that crime, like you saw this week, a detective at SPD was able to use camera footage in part to make the arrest of the two tragic murders
down at Rainier Beach,
down at Rainier Beach. That's right. And so it is a tool, and it is an important tool, and one that we support, that I support using. And you know, we care about the privacy protections, which is why we put those in place. And then, to my colleague's point, we'll have to align to the state on the ALPR, but we support the use of it. And I will say, I was disappointed to hear. I appreciate that the mayor kept the current cameras in place and the real-time crime center in place. I do appreciate the mayor did that. She sees a value in that. I was disappointed that we're not moving forward with, we're putting the cameras at the stadiums, but we're not turning them on. Yeah. We've got FIFA coming, and I think that is really important. And also, outside of Garfield High School, there's a camera pause, and we've heard from parents who they want the cameras around the schools so that when these things are happening, unfortunately, we have, you know, access to footage in order to investigate these crimes.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to take this a little more broadly, if I could, and just look at some of the actions the City Council has taken recently when it comes to responding to concerns about federal immigration activity specifically. A few examples. The Council passed a ban on allowing federal immigration officers to stage any actions on city property. You passed a moratorium on building detention centers. City employees are not allowed to share information, etc. Councilmember Rivera, how will these actions protect Seattleites? Should immigrant communities feel safer, fully protected? How do you look at that?
I look at this as that we are all aligned on this issue. I will say everyone on the City Council and the mayor supports this as well. We want to protect our residents in Seattle, including our immigrant population. And so we're doing all we can. Some of this stuff we'll have to wait to see how it plays out. But that doesn't mean that we're not doing all we can, and we should do all we can. So my bill actually was codifying Keep Washington Working laws to not share, not just SPD share information, but also I added the piece about any city department should not be sharing non-publicly available information related to civil immigration enforcement. So hopefully these things will keep our immigrant population safe. Some of these other things, like the staging, other cities have done as well, and we will have to see how those play out if you know, the Fed should come here and try to stage, right? Some of this stuff, we'll have to see how it plays out. Yeah.
Councilmember Kettle, you were the sponsor behind some of these bills, too. How do they make Seattle safer? Can I ask that general question?
I think they're very important, each of themselves, but I would add that the end result is greater than the sum of its parts because they reinforce each other. And they also show leadership and they show where our values are. And then on the practical side, we're making a statement related to like staging on city property. And part of this is under the Constitution, we have the right to do that. And we have to show that. We have to make that point known. And because otherwise it can be lost. And so this combination says, hey, these are our values, you cannot do this. And if they were to do something like this, we're working with the city attorney's office, whose name has not come up yet, but the city attorney, Evans, in terms of getting injunctive relief. So in combination with like setting the standards, professional standards in terms of all law enforcement, whether it's federal, state, county, or surrounding jurisdiction. We set the standards, and you combine these things, and it sets the expectation. So if something does happen, we have that baseline to work from.
Can I talk about those professionalism standards? I want to talk about that and also what the state is now doing, a law prohibiting officers from wearing masks, which has been a trademark of a lot of these ICE agents as they've come into different cities. This activity at the local and the state level has drawn some pushback from the Seattle Police Officers Guild and some other officers, too. The new SPOG president, Kent Liu, recently said this about that policy. If the powers that be, if certain politicians want to have this feud with the feds, in my opinion, leave us out of it. We're not going to put ourselves in a position where we are now obstructing federal law enforcement from doing their job or conducting their operation. So you got some local officers saying we don't want to have to report on federal officers. What's your message to the rank and file cops out there?
Well, two things. One, if you look at the bill that was just passed in Olympia, it is a law. It was just signed by Governor Ferguson.
Right.
But, there's high legal risk with that. We didn't go that route with that, as you saw with the California case. And I didn't want to go with that. Instead, what I did in terms of my bill resolution was to have the professionalism standards piece, showing that what we expect from Seattle PD is what we expect from law enforcement. So the head of SPOG, our new chief of SPOG, can come and explain to me how he can be against that. Because everything I've been doing has been respectful of those pieces and respectful and supportive of our chief and of our men and women in the Seattle Police Department. If there's a 911 call regarding an armed kidnapping on Aurora, they need to respond. They need to engage, aka respond to that call. And once they're there, they don't know if these kitted up people are actual law enforcement or just somebody else doing something else.
Right.
And so they need to engage. Hey, what's your credentials? And they've been doing that professionally. There's nothing wrong with that. And then as part of that process, you get a sense of probable cause too. And then the documentation piece is, okay, you got the body-worn video and you got the vehicles. We're not asking for Seattle PD to be doing, what I do not want on our streets is OK corral. Absolutely not. But what we're asking through the directive with Chief Barnes and what we've done as well, and what I've said as Chair of Public Safety, is respectful and professional. And it's our duty to do that. Okay. So SPOG can look at that, and they can come to my office, and we can talk about it. But as somebody who's been working public safety in this city and is a retired naval officer, I have him come to me and explain why everything that we've done in this city is not appropriate.
Okay, fair enough. Councilmember Rivera, your thoughts about this pushback from SPOG, other police officers about this policies? What do you think?
Yeah, Brian, the only thing I would add to Councilmember Kettle's remarks is just that we need to ensure, and I'm sure the mayor will be working with the police chief to be clear with officers on what the expectation is. I think if you're clear on the front end on what the expectations expectations are, you get better outcomes in the long run. So I think that will be important in terms of how these directives roll out.
Got it. One more touch on the Police Officers Union before we leave it. I want to raise an issue that recently came up during a Public Safety Committee meeting from the Chief of CARE, Amy Barden. So CARE, of course, the Community Assisted Response and Engagement Department, takes in 911 calls, also dispatches CARE teams, trained social workers who can handle less serious calls like a person down, etc. But Chief Barden was saying that even with the council approving funding to have more CARE teams going citywide, they haven't been able to do as much as they're actually capable of doing because of the city's contract with SPOG. It's stopping CARE teams, she's saying, from responding to certain calls.
Today, we estimate that the 24 responders are on average fulfilling only 28% of their capacity due to the constraints described. And so we must innovate. It is unacceptable to not fully maximize this important team, and it's also unacceptable to waste even $1 in such a challenging budget environment.
Councilmember Rivera, can I start with you? What's going on here?
Well, Brian, I'll say about this point is that at the moment, we should focus on what CARE can do. I understand there are parameters, so I don't want to excuse the parameters, but I want to say that we have a team of people. I've met with the CARE folks, and they very much want to help. And we have a CARE team in the University District, for instance.
Yeah.
All our districts have CARE teams. And I will say that I would very much like to have a conversation with Chief Barden and others about how can the teams help at the within the district, across the neighborhoods, across the city, because there are things that they can do besides respond to 911 calls. They can do, there are folks in the right-of-way that need assistance, and if they're walking around, they should be offering assistance to those folks. There's nothing to prevent the CARE folks from walking around our neighborhoods. They're already in the neighborhoods and responding to folks. There is not a lack of folks needing help, unfortunately, within our neighborhoods.
Yep.
We want to help those people. They want to help those people as well. Let's do that, and let's focus on that for the time being, given the parameters that are in place. I just feel like I agree with her. Let's not waste the resource. I don't think we need to.
Okay.
I think there are things that we can do and that CARE can do, and I would like to see that.
Got it. Councilmember Kettle, I know the mayor's office was saying at this meeting maybe there's a way to work with the city attorney to compel a different interpretation of the SPOG contract. I know this is a really challenging issue. Can you talk about this? Where are we in this process? What's going on?
Well, I'm aware of what's going on, and that's one reason why I designed the meeting the way I did. I had the three chiefs. Instead of having the three chiefs talk about the departments, I had them talk about alternative response. And I always say alternative response, by the way, instead of just CARE, because alternative response is broader than CARE.
Yeah, SPD's doing stuff, fire department. Yeah.
So that was all purposely done.
Yes.
And I knew it was going to raise things to the surface, Brian. But you know what? You have to have things raised to the surface to deal with it. And so now I've had a meeting, a call with Chief Barden and previous calls. And I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're looking at the CARE enabling legislation. Okay, what can we do there? Give me ideas. I talked to Chief Scoggins from Fire. I said, Chief, and Chief's been around, he gave me some great background and says, hey, from your perspective, what can be different? One of the things that we need to get away from is this bipolar world of SPOG and CARE. And that's what we're going to do, because CARE has a public health piece, behavioral health particularly.
Yes.
Who's responsible for public health? The county.
King County mainly, yeah, right.
So we can look at relationships with King County. There's about 3 main areas that I'm looking at. Who else does health, like health?
The state?
Fire.
Okay, all right.
So we can look at, relationship with fire. So we need to move around this CARE SPOG thing. And this is what's going to happen when we go through this. And it's going to be different things on the executive, I think, in the future. But I also think that we can either update the SPOG, the CARE enabling legislation, or new legislation that builds on it. And I think that's really important. And separately, because it's tied to this, is also the public drug use and possession ordinance. And so what was not around back then was CARE.
Yeah.
And here's, none of this is by accident, by the way. Who's a big piece of the public drug use and possession? Because there's supposed to be 2 answers, either diversion or jail, right?
I've been getting a few of these wrong. I'll let you tell me.
Diversion is primarily through PDA.
Right, yeah. Purpose, dignity, action. Yeah,
exactly. Now, where does PDA now reside? Does it reside under Human Services Department anymore?
Right.
No,
right.
It resides under CARE.
Okay.
And so we have pieces in terms of the alternative as it relates to public use, in terms of substance use disorder and the general addiction pieces. So we have avenues to work this. So what I'm doing right now is I'm engaging with the stakeholders on this. We're looking at possibilities. I'm working with central staff. I get input from my colleagues. By the way, Councilmember Rivera is fantastic on different pieces, bringing her sharp legal mind on some of these, with amendments. And this goes way back to ALPR in the spring of '24. Sure. And so we're going to be doing this. And so I've given you kind of like some broad outlines. And then, so maybe in the summer I can come back and then we can talk about it. Just ahead of recess or ahead of budget, we'll have a review.
That sounds like a plan. Councilmember Kettle, let me stick with you and a little bit more on emergency services. The Seattle Times recently did a report on some gaps in the city's 911 system. In one case, a woman called the city's nurse line, waited for 10 hours, unfortunately passed away. The city's nurse-ordered ambulance rides are exempted from wait time standards and tracking here in the city of Seattle. You've said the city needs to look into this. I know you have some concerns about this. What's the latest? What's going on here?
Yes, we have to look at this. as I said to Mr. Croman at Seattle Times and others, Mr. Beekman at the Seattle Times, actually, that I've been to the fire alarm center. I've been there. I've listened to them talk to the nurses line, talk to the nurses as calls were coming in. I have great confidence in the system, but there's always room for improvement. So I had a conversation. I mentioned I already talked to Chief Scoggins, was related to alternative response. I also talked to him about this as well. And I think we have some opportunities to do a look at it. I think it's good to have this on the committee agenda. It's probably going to be later because we're so jam-packed in terms of issues that we're working. But that allows fire and the executive, particularly since we have a new administration, to work through this in terms of looking at the contract, looking at the parameters of what's going on with AMR, looking at the relationship between the nurses line and the fire alarm center, where our firefighters are, and say, hey, what can we do differently? Because it's important. And it's important because she could be my mother. She could be anybody's mother, or sister or daughter. And we need to be doing right. And I believe in this case, it's looking at some of those contract positions, and also like who knows what, when, where. Okay. Does one person have the full story? Does the AMR crew that came to the door, did they have the full? So you ask these questions, you work through these pieces, and then we can look to adjust and adapt anything that we may need to do, with working with fire department and so forth, and then look to make those changes.
Councilmember Rivera, anything to add here?
I mean, I would just say, review is important. You've heard me say, Brian, that we run these programs and we have to make sure that we're reviewing and make sure they're doing what they're intended to do. And here is our now opportunity to look at this. Unfortunately, something tragic happened, and we should be looking at things before that happens. But nevertheless, we're at this point, and I appreciate the chairs giving attention to this, and we're all going to be looking at this, and giving that review is really important.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Rivera, I'm going to stick with you and talk about a new plan for Mayor Wilson that would have a big impact on neighborhoods. I'm thinking of the committee you chair here. So the mayor wants to have 1,000 people who are homeless inside by the end of the year, 500 by the time the World Cup comes to Seattle in June. She's hoping to expand capacity first at Seattle's tiny home villages. Some of these villages moving from 100 to 150 residents, for example. Others could be as big as 250 people. Just generally here, what do you think of this plan, how it's going to impact our neighborhoods, please?
Well, Brian, I have a lot of questions. This is a newer proposal, at least, that got sent down to us. I know a lot of people, including constituents, have questions, and so we need to get through those questions. We need to get a lot more information. How will this all work? I will say that I appreciate the idea to have behavioral health and case management 24/7 on site. I do think going from 100 to 250 people is a lot, given the high acuity needs of this population. And we want to make sure people have the access to services so they can succeed. I also have a concern about public safety around these sites, so ensuring what is the plan for 24/7 security so that we're actually also making sure that the neighborhoods are safe. That has been an issue that we've had across the city at different sites, and we've been talking about it since we got here, Chair Kettle and I. And so I want to make sure that we are addressing that and not adding, while we're helping people, and we need to, we're also addressing the public safety needs of the neighborhoods.
Got it. Councilmember Kettle, this happened at a recent briefing, and you actually raised some concerns about just how fast the mayor was trying to make this happen, how that might impact some neighborhoods, the communication going on there. I want to talk about those concerns. We got an email from Britt who wrote this. How are we going to make sure we support our unhoused neighbors during the World Cup? Because sweeping them from the area only leads to them distrusting the city and community more, which make getting them into any kind of safe space in the future even harder. Let's talk about this, please.
Well, the first thing is I don't allow the word sweeps in my office, because sweeps is like a PR term that's been used for those that want to have positions against certain things, and so that's not what happens. Earlier you talked about passionate and emotion, and then what happens is when you're on the campaign trail, like with the mayor's campaign, you hear these different voices, but then you come in the office, like on surveillance, she's now learning. She said this yesterday. Oh, actually, the program does this very differently. It's the same thing with the Unified Care Team and the efforts that the city's doing, because this is Seattle. We have those values, and so we're working them in. This idea that we're against this is wrong.
Okay.
And I think this is great for the new team coming in, because they're realizing, and it should be a lesson for everybody, particularly the team that's coming in, that the voices that you heard on the campaign trail were not knowledgeable about the topic in which they were talking. And with that backdrop, what we need to do is like the lessons learned point. We talked about this with the earlier conversation happening with the 911. Lessons learned attitude. How do we make it better? So we've all been on the streets. By the way, all of us council members, we're out and about. And not to bring this up, but like this morning I was on the street.
Okay.
And I saw a dead man on 3rd Avenue, 3rd and Vine.
I'm sorry to hear it.
Yes. And so I'm talking to the officer, about, hey, what's happening here? And these issues that are happening. It was an OD. And it's striking. And so it's like, hey, what's happening here? And how can we get answers? And so I'm aware of these pieces, that area, 3rd and Blanchard and so forth.
Yeah.
And then, so it's like, how do we do this? So I know tiny home villages, by the way, it says home, but it's shelter. It's not housing.
Right.
But we've been incorporating these lessons learned pieces in terms of security. I had a tiny home combination RV village within like a half mile of my home. But because we're engaging and they're learning the lessons learned, the service providers, we're putting in place those public safety pieces, those protocols.
Okay.
We're adding in, the wraparound, care, the counseling. That's what happened at the Salmon Bay Village.
Yeah.
And that made a big difference moving forward. And if we keep doing that, and we're augmenting it, by the way, in the legislative department, because we have this neighborhood engagement and mitigation plan process underway.
Okay.
And we'll work with the executive on that.
Okay.
And if
Thank
I
you.
can add,
Briefly,
Brian,
please.
I mean, on the tiny home villages, we need to ensure we have a plan for off-ramping, for getting people permanent housing. I mean, we're seeing a lot of folks staying longer in tiny house villages that were intended. That isn't, it is
to be a
meant to be
short-term,
temporary.
yeah.
Exactly. It's meant to be short-term. So what are the off-ramping strategies? There's a tiny house village in my district where folks have been there for years.
Yeah.
And so how do we get folks permanent housing and not just this temporary housing? So all those questions need to be answered as part of this endeavor as well.
Thank you. I need to do the minute-long version with you, Councilmember Rivera, about the library levy. This is big for the council. The mayor presented a plan for about a $410 million levy, up from $219 million when voters passed it 7 years ago. Does this proposal need to be tweaked? What's going on? Give me some rough sketches on this, please.
I will say this is a really exciting levy. It's a really exciting proposal. In this proposal, we're maintaining all the great services that the library provides, including open hours. Folks in the city love libraries, as do I. As I know, Councilmember Kettle joins me in loving libraries. And for me, this is an opportunity to keep maintaining the services that we have. The 2019 levy was very supported, highly supported by constituents, and I believe this will be as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll throw one more question to you, Councilmember Kettle. Photo evidence reveals you are the tallest Seattle City Council member, so I'm giving you the basketball question. Should Seattleites get their hopes up about the Sonics coming back to town?
We have a strong case, and it's the arenas in my district. I have a strong relationship with the Storm and others that are like the Kraken and everybody else, and we have all the pieces that are there. And with the NBA, usually come in pairs, so Vegas and Seattle is the natural, and so I am confident, but cautiously confident, because I don't want to jinx anything.
Okay, all right. I'll call that a mid-range jumper from Councilmember Kettle.
Yes.
Councilmember Rivera, thank you for joining me. We got to get out of here. I'm Brian Callanan. See you next time on Council Edition.